Spring showers have continued as summer showers and the rain keeps coming. What do we have to look forward to? We will address that and more in this edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Okay, it's been a whole month since we have last spoken to you, so that's what we're first looking at. We're looking at the last month's rainfall, and this is percent of normal precipitation. And as you can see, over a good chunk of the southeast, from Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and a good chunk of Florida, we have seen above normal precipitation. In many places, up to 200% of normal, where the darker blue is, and purple shows even 300% of normal in a couple of those spots. The only places where we've seen below normal precipitation is on the Gulf Coast in Florida and around Mobile and southern Alabama. Those places we've seen below normal precipitation. One reason we've seen above normal precipitation was Tropical Storm Andrea, which moved kind of across Florida and then up the Atlantic coast and brought a good deal of rain across the Savannah Basin, across much of North Carolina and Virginia. So that was where we saw a good deal of this rainfall come from, and also in parts of Florida. The areas in Alabama and the Gulf Coast of Florida really did not see as much rainfall from that. So now we look back a little bit further at the last 180 days, and part of the reason I want to show you that is kind of where we've come as far as the drought goes. And as you can see, over the last 180 days, we've got two distinct areas that have been a little bit below normal. One is along the North Carolina coast, and recently, as you saw on the last slide, we had more rainfall in that area, a good deal of rainfall, especially from the tropical storm. In the Florida Panhandle, and then along the Big Bend of Florida, we're below normal. Over the rest of the area, we're at least near normal or above normal over the rest of the southeast. So that kind of gives you, something to work from as we look through all the rest of today's show. So now we'll look at a graph from the National Climatic Data Center, which is kind of busy. So we'll do a little explanation of what some of these lines are. The first one kind of shows, when you look at the blue line, that shows precipitation over the last 100 or so years. It actually goes back before 1900, so we're looking at about 120 years. And so you can see how we get fluctuations up and down all during that time. And then the green line, which you can kind of see in there, is kind of a filter, and so it kind of takes out a lot of the peaks and kind of gives you a feel for the general highs and lows. So over the time period, it kind of takes out some of the higher peaks, but it gives you a general feel over a longer period of time what the precipitation is during that time. Then you've got the red line, and this is the trend over the last 100 years. So this is for Alabama, and as you can see, as we go through time, the trend is for more precipitation over that 100-year period. And as we get to the last 10 or 12 years or so, you'll notice that a lot of those years, especially between 2000 and 2010, most of those years, and the binomial filter line is below the normal. And it isn't until the last 3 years that we've actually seen a little bit above normal during that time, and right now we're seeing above normal during that time. So that's good news. Maybe we're on a pattern that we're going to start to see maybe above normal couple of years. We'll see how that pans out, but we'll be looking at that very closely to see if we see some of the same trends. Now that we've looked at Alabama, now let's look at Georgia. Now you know what all those lines mean. Notice the red line that stays very flat, where our precipitation has stayed very normal during that whole time. But also at the end of this 100 years and the last year, we've seen above normal precipitation. Again, over the last 10 years, we've seen below normal precipitation, which is why our reservoirs have stayed low, which is why we've had drought issues during that time. But that we've seen improvement over the last 180 days, as mentioned before, and hopefully that trend continues. For South Carolina, again, notice the red line. It's kind of the opposite of what we saw in Alabama, and then we saw normal in Georgia, but we're seeing a decrease in that precipitation over the last 100 years. Also very interesting. However, that binomial filter, the green line and the blue line, in the last few years have started to show above normal. So we're creeping above normal for that time, which is why all our reservoirs are in good shape and why we're not in drought anymore. And then we get to North Carolina, and again, that red line is still decreasing during that time, but not quite as much. But again, you still see the same pattern over the last couple years. We've seen above normal precipitation, and so that has improved things and made things at least a little bit better in the short term of recent years. Well, here's a look at the 28-day average stream flow from our partners over at the USGS. And what you can see, which we haven't seen very often up until this last few months, is above normal stream flow over a good chunk of the southeast. In fact, over most of the southeast. The only areas that we talked about because of low precipitation are in South Alabama, along the Gulf Coast, and then a little bit in the Big Bend area of Florida. But for the most part, we're seeing normal stream flows, which is actually, for all of us, is good to see. So let's look at the objective short-term drought indicators, and just so we can see where we are from a short-term perspective. And as you can see, again, Tropical Storm Andrea had a lot to do with the improvement over much of the southeast. And as you can see in Florida, in Georgia, all the way through up to Virginia, most of those indicators, short-term type indicators, are showing above normal. But even in Alabama, we're near normal in those. And then just in the Panhandle is the only place we're showing some below normal indicators. As for the long term, you can see that, that obviously that takes over a longer period of time. They're looking even back as far as 5 years to see where we've been. And we had just come out of a drought this past fall, and a very dry fall, and then it became very wet. And so even our long term, it still takes a while to come out of that. And the only place we're really showing a little bit of drought based on long-term indicators is in that central Florida region. And if you noticed, we'll go back actually and look, there are some areas that show below normal stream flows in that area where we've seen some of the long-term effects. And so again, that gives you a feel for where we are, especially the stream flow tends to be more affected by the long term. Okay, so now let's look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, and this is our current U.S. Drought Monitor. There is no place that is considered in drought. Now, the yellow shows abnormally dry, which is not considered drought, but there is no place in the southeast that is considered in drought right now. So how does that compare for drought since December 4th of 2012? Well, as you can see, we were in the midst of a pretty significant drought during that time. And over the last 6 months, I showed the last 180 days of rainfall. We received enough rainfall to fill reservoirs, to improve conditions over a good chunk of the southeast. At that time, over 48% of the southeast was in a drought. Well, now it's 0. So all this rainfall, how has it impacted our lakes? Well, we look at these lakes, and many of them are in Georgia or in the South Carolina border. Many of these also go into Alabama. So we're looking at the kind of this list here, and this is isn't comprehensive, but it kind of gives you a feel. Allatoona is just about a foot above normal, or near a foot above normal. Again, that's one that flows into Alabama eventually. We have Lake Lanier, and that's always we always look at that to see where we are in the southeast, and it is a foot and almost a half above normal. And so that's good news. That's above its full elevation. And so going into the summer, as we start to warm up and everything else, we should be in pretty good shape, and that should slowly start to fall as we move through the summer. Carter's is above normal. Lake Hartwell along the South Carolina Georgia border. Hartwell and Clark Hill Dam, which is Thurmond Dam, those are all above normal, which we haven't seen in a very long time. And it looks, just based on the inflows into it and our stream flow around that, those should stay near normal through the summer and be good through the rest of the year. As for West Point, it's a little bit above normal. It's holding just a little bit more water than it should, and so most of that system is looking good. So our reservoirs are really looking pretty good in the southeast, and although a little bit above normal, we still have to be very careful for heavy rainfalls, because some of those reservoirs have to hold for floodwaters, so we have to be very careful as we get into that. So they will be releasing some and try and get back to that full pool elevation in the coming weeks.
All right, let's take a look at what we can expect for precipitation across the southeast for the next few days. We're going to begin the period under a ridge of high pressure across the southeast. On Friday, we can expect mainly showers and thunderstorms along the coast, where the moisture will be the highest near the surface. And as we get into the weekend, we're going to see that moisture move a bit further inland. As a result, we're going to see showers and thunderstorms move further north and west into the area. And really, as we get into the midterm period, we're going to see about the same pattern. We're still going to have that ridge of high pressure aloft. We're going to see continued chances for rain across the southeast. until about Wednesday when this pattern starts to break down. At this point, the upper flow is still going to be pretty weak, but it's going to be strengthening, and we're going to regain that northwest flow and start to see a trough develop near the area. For the 7-day period, despite that ridge of high pressure, we can expect to see widespread precip. There's going to be mainly heavier amounts, generally 2 to 4 inches along the coast, and then the further you get from the coast, the lighter the amounts will be generally. In that area with the heavy amounts, we can expect to see some isolated higher amounts above 4 inches. Looking out into the long-term period, we're expecting above normal precipitation amounts across the area. I hinted at it in the mid-range outlook, but we're going to have that trough developing, and looking at where that trough will be during the daytime on Saturday. If that trough does happen to shift a bit further south, that could mean more widespread support for precip across the southeast.
Well, I continue to be a broken record about our ENSO and La Nina and El Nino, but this is quiet, and that's good news. That's what's brought us, it seems like, an active pattern, more normal type weather pattern over the winter and into the spring, and that should continue through the summer. So that's good news for us. Like I said, we'll continue to mention this. We'll continue to watch it to see if we move one way or the other. But right now, through the summer, through the fall, and even into the winter, it looks like we're going to be in neutral conditions. How's that going to affect our weather? Well, look, here's the 1 month temperature outlook, and it keeps us normal. Okay, so we look at the 1 month precipitation probabilities, and for a good chunk of the southeast, it gets us above normal. One of the reasons that we're looking at above normal, we are wet in the southeast. So quite often during that time, if we have a wet spring, a wet May, as we go into June and July, we tend to be a little bit above normal because we have moisture at the ground. So we get those pop-up type thunderstorms. We tend to stay active once we become active. Just like in the past years where we've been dry going into the summer, we tend to stay a little bit more dry. So that's part of the reason that we're looking at wet conditions, and this is for July. So then we go to the 3 month outlook, and this is July, August, and September. And as you can see, again, our temperatures look fairly normal, except for in South Florida, where we're looking at chances of above normal temperatures. And then when we go to the precipitation, it looks like above normal precipitation for all of the southeast during those months. And that's good news. Again, it follows along a little bit with what we were talking about with the feedback mechanism, where we continue to stay wet, and there's no clear La Nina or El Nino to kind of push things one way or the other. It looks more like a normal conditions with things in the southeast. And then the last thing we'll look at is the October, November, and December. So this, we've looked through September, now we're looking, and right now there's nothing to kind of steer us one way or the other. And again, that's because of our neutral forecast for ENSO during that time. There's not something to really push us one way or the other all over the country. So we'll have to watch that and see if that changes. And again, that will probably go along with what happens with our La Nina or El Nino. Well, the bottom line, in the short term, the rain continues as summer officially begins. And so as we come out of the spring with good rainfall and everything in pretty good condition as far as droughts go, we'll look to see if that will continue, and we think it will through early parts of the summer. As for the long term, the chances for long-term above normal summer rain look pretty good. In fact, from a drought perspective, except for maybe some short-term drought when we get real hot and quick, we should be out of drought as far as our reservoirs, and kind of long-term through this summer into the fall and through the winter next winter. We should be in pretty good shape through that whole time period. And then we'll look to next year to maybe talk about drought again, but we're hoping we're going to stay in good shape and be ready for this time period, at least for the next year. We'd appreciate if you get the opportunity. We're looking to revamp the Water Resources Outlook. We're looking to make some changes. So we'd appreciate feedback on anything you would like to add. If there's anything you really like, if there's anything that you want to see, you can email me and let me know. I would appreciate that and would enjoy hearing from you as we start to look to make improvements. Our next Water Resource Outlook is expected on July 9, 2013. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Remember that you can find much of this information at our website at weather.gov/SERFC. Also, come and visit our Facebook page where we will provide notifications of products we issue. Also, feel free to comment and pass that information along. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email address todd.hamill@noaa.gov.